messes are all that she'll find. I'll tell a story, both true and allegory. Oh, the process is precious, so it takes up all my time.
When you hire Parker Pfister as your wedding photographer, you also play a role in his self-discovery.
I have fun with the camera and myself, but it's more just watching myself grow as an artist and grow as a human. I've been through, I'll just say, the ringer in my life. Like, I've had some horrific accidents, and it's been a long list of experiences.
This is The Overlook with Matt Peiken, a podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. 20 years ago, when Pfister moved to Asheville, he made his living shooting photographs at the weddings of celebrities. But over the years, Pfister has explored his own curiosities, both through his viewfinder and in the darkroom. His manipulated images resonate with dualities that convey multiple meanings and emotions. He's a prolific photographer, and yet it's surprising that only now is he seeing his first solo gallery exhibition here, through Mars Landing Galleries in Mars Hill. The opening reception is Friday, November 1st. I speak with Pfister here about his unique approach to blending fine art with wedding photography, his fearless explorations into dangerous territory, and the work he's planning to show at Mars Landing. My conversation with Parker Pfister took place before Hurricane Helene. I started this conversation by asking Parker what his photography was like when he moved to Asheville 20 years ago.
At that time, I was more of a celebrity photographer. I traveled. I could live anywhere I wanted because I was on a plane. So
Celebrity photographer for who? For magazines or
no, for weddings.
So at
weddings. That point, yeah, weddings.
You were a wedding photographer for celebrities.
Yes.
How did you get into that niche?
Again, a wrong turn, accidental. It seems like everything I just fall into. But I shot my first wedding in 1984, and I did several with my dad like that, and it was like $300 in a weekend and whatever. Went off into my fine art world, and then years later came back to wedding photography, and I enjoyed the process. If I could put my fine art spin on it, at that time it was evolving where I could just do whatever I wanted in the wedding world. And very quickly I made a name for myself, was like top 10 in the world in wedding photography, and climbed to the top rung. And
it's interesting to me that you talked about putting a fine art spin on your wedding photography, and you were trying to do your fine art photography at the same time. Have you always had the mindset, I have to earn a living, so I'm going to do wedding photography, but my fine art is important to me, I'm always going to do that as well?
Yep.
It was always a blend of the two.
Yeah, it was a meal ticket for sure.
Really?
But I shot weddings a long time. It was beautiful and fun, and I loved the people I met. I got to hang out with the coolest people in the world, like George Clooney. I got to hang out with George Clooney. I drove him in my golf cart in Mexico because he was staying next to me. I was given J-Lo's house to stay in, so I was staying in J-Lo's house. George was next to me. He needed a ride down to the beach. So I got George Clooney in my cart, and I've always been good with not being starstruck or anything. That's what made me really good at my job, because they were all NDAs, and he grew up right across the river from me. So his dad, Nick Clooney, was my weatherman.
That's right. He was in Northern Kentucky.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so my dad and his dad actually knew each other because Nick was a fish guy, and my dad was the head of ichthyology in Ohio. So he did all the fish stuff. And so that's how, and I'm like, my dad and your dad actually knew each other. Your dad was my weatherman. He goes, no way. So we got in this awesome conversation down to the beach, and it was great.
So what were you doing with your fine art photography then? At the time when you came to Asheville, what were you after? What were you looking for? You've done a wide variety of work with your fine art photography. So I want to get a sense of the evolution of what you were into, what was your motivation, and where you've evolved to now. So what were you doing back then?
It's always been driven by my curiosity. So whatever I'm interested in, like one day I may be working on a series of decaying things in the world, decaying plants, decaying animals, decay. And then the next day I may be doing some high fashion thing. Like I'm all over the place, and it just depends on what I'm interested in.
Were you always doing both like in nature and in the studio, where from high concept studio creations to just things you would find in nature.
100%.
Really, that's interesting to me, because I would think on one hand, while that's really liberating and just go where your flow takes you, I could see where you would have a difficult time getting traction with, let's say, gallery curators, museum curators, and others who want to understand a deeper body of your work. And if you're all over the place, they may not know how to get traction with your work. Was that what was happening?
Oh, I wasn't even trying.
You weren't even trying.
For me, it was all about me. I was selfish and still am. When I go into a photo shoot, it's for me. And people hire me because they love what I do, which was all done for me. So it just spins around and it spits out a product that they love, a piece that they love.
That's interesting to me that you said, I just do it for me. And because you always had your wedding photography, you didn't have to worry about earning $1 with your fine art photography.
Right,
so you just did it for the love.
I was a collector, and I still am. Like, I still have my pocket camera with me every day, always, and I make photos. Like, out the door this morning, I had to make a photo of these granddaddy long legs in the corner of the door because it was interesting.
Is it one of those pocket Leica cameras, or what kind of?
Well, no, I had this for a while, but I have switched to a little old vintage Ricoh GR2.
Those do qualify as vintage today,
yeah,
even though they're digital.
I think they quit this, and it's digital. It is. I had the film version of this for years, and that's what turned me on to the digital version. And gosh, probably half of the show I'm getting ready to have was made with this little camera.
So you're just shooting whatever strikes your mind. You never sought out to have a gallery show or museum show.
It was a dream, sure. And I loosely put it out there. And in 1981, when I was 11, I won the World Fair in second place next door over here in Knoxville. And from that point on, I was just hooked with photography. It was my life. It was my air. I had my own darkroom when I was 8 years old and was doing crazy cyberchrome stuff when I was 9 or 10, which most people don't even know what that is now. Now, I've done, oh my gosh, a lot of jobs until the weddings really started picking up. I have done everything you can imagine for work. I was a rescue, firefighter, diver, EMT. I worked in a funeral home. I worked in a pheasant farm. Like, I've done a little bit of everything.
So
even McDonald's.
Wow. So I did McDonald's for 2 weeks.
I did 2 weeks too. Right on. 2-week club.
So it didn't matter to you how you earned a living. You found a really fertile vein with the wedding photography that proved lucrative. You were kind of circulating some high-paying circumstances.
Yeah. And
so that's fantastic. You finally did get some traction with your fine art photography. How did that even happen, and with what body? How did that happen?
It actually happened through the wedding and portrait world. I was putting the spins on my portraiture and my weddings with this heavy fine art influence, whatever that is. It's whatever I said it was, I think. And it was 2002, I guess, this world organization called WPPI, Wedding and Portrait Photographers International, which at that time was 40,000 people would show up in Las Vegas for this massive convention, and they would have 2 rooms where 2 speakers were going. So each room would have over 20,000 people, and they're huge. So the first time I ever spoke in front of any photographers or about what I do was in front of 20,000 people, and it was terrifying. But I got up and I watched several of the other presenters, and I'm like, oh my God, my work looks nothing like this. They're going to laugh at me. They're just like, it's so different here. And the head of Canon was actually in the audience. And that night I became what they called an explorer of light. They took me to dinner and said, you need to be our bridge between fine art and weddings.
Because I imagine the Wedding Photographers Association, their wedding photographers might have a stigma in a sense of, oh, they just do schlock. That any photographer is the same as any other wedding photographer.
Bottom of the barrel.
And they're just scraping for dollars. And so I get the sense that others saw, hey, this guy, Parker, lends a real artistic legitimacy to what we do.
Yeah.
What were you doing with wedding photography, or maybe still continue to do with wedding photography, that was that bridge into the conceptual fine art world?
Oh my gosh. Letting go of the ideas and the rules, first of all, that everything has to be in focus. Everything has to be framed perfectly. You have to see all the highlights and all the shadows. You have to smile at the camera. You have to hold hands, and your hand has to be turned in a certain angle. And the light has to be this way. It can't be that way. It has to be this way. And there's so many rules around that. And I didn't grow up with the internet, of course, because I'm 56. And we didn't have any conventions. So when I grew up, I learned from just doing. My dad was a scientist. My grandfather was an inventor. And that's how I learned everything. When I go to my dad and ask him how to do something, he'd be like, just go do it and find out how to do it. And I'm like, okay. So that's what I was doing with my photography. And I started doing wedding photography for me. And I promised my brides that I'm going to make something, whatever you've seen me do, I'm not going to do. I want to do something different. I have no idea what it's going to be. I'd show up literally with this camera or one like it, and that's it, and get paid ridiculous amounts of money. And I'd show up with a pocket camera, and they're like, do you need to unload your van back here? And I'm like, no, I'm good.
Did your wedding photography at all influence what you were wanting to do with your fine art photography?
Oh, yeah. I think it went back and forth. I, for years, called weddings my whetstone. So it was to sharpen my knife. It was to sharpen, because I show up on wedding day, I get to be a landscape photographer, which I used to be and still am. I get to be a portrait photographer, which I used to be and still am. I get to be a documentary photographer. I get to be the family's historian, which is a pretty big honor. And I get to see the people the way I see them, the way they are, not the way they want to act in front of a camera.
That's really interesting. I've seen some bodies of your work that they look like you're taking different photographs and merging them together. It's one thing to be in the studio and do things. It's one thing to be outside and do things. You're saying it doesn't matter what captures your eye. If something captures your eye, you shoot it. But that's not the end of your images.
Oh, no, not by far.
Yeah, so talk about what happens after you shoot your images to create your artwork.
Oh my gosh, I really started pushing hard and doing masking, double negatives in the darkroom, flipping things upside down and playing around with that. I shot on a large format camera, so I see the world upside down. So every photo I make is upside down to my eyes, and it looks right to me. So why not display them like that? What if I just display half of the photo like that? So how can I do that? And then modern technology takes off, and I switched, not completely, but I tried out digital in 1999. So I was a very early adopter. The first big Nikon digital camera, SLR, that came out, I had. And It was awful, just absolutely awful. But it was also magical at the same time, right?
Yeah, I can see where it would be attractive to you to just experiment with this new technology.
Yeah.
Yet you've never really abandoned film, right? Yeah.
No, I still play with film.
Yeah. What is the difference for you in terms of what you're after, in terms of whether you're using film or doing digital?
Well, I think a lot of it is process for me. It's ingrained within me. I see a radical difference between the two. It's getting closer and closer with certain technique and attention to certain things. You can get very close to film, and where I'll even fool myself every once in a while now. I helped develop a couple softwares that are out there that help mimic that. So now I can use either one.
More after this. In Asheville and throughout western North Carolina, Hurricane Helene swept away hundreds of lives, thousands of livelihoods, and countless elements that make living here so unique and special. If you're in a position to help this region recover, I'm going to direct you to 2 reputable organizations to send money. One is the North Carolina Disaster Relief Fund. You'll find details at nc.gov/donate. The other is Mountain True. It will take years and many millions of dollars to restore our legendary mountains, trails, and rivers, and that work is the heart of Mountain True's mission. Learn more and donate at mountaintrue.org. I noticed in your work, you yourself are a subject matter in quite a bit of your work.
Basically all of it.
A lot of, all of it. Why?
It's my therapy. Photography is my therapy. I've been to a therapist a little bit and never really saw any value in it. I see more value in getting in nature and being curious and playing and understanding, and I see myself in a different way through that, or meeting other people when I'm doing portraiture. It's all kind of a self-portrait of
these
how
are
I would like to be, or who I used to be, or how can I help this person through me. So.
Yeah, these are all tight portraits, or for the most part, very tightly zoomed in portraits, very finely focused as well. And you could see the individual hairs in your beard and their mustache. Right. You said this is therapy for you. I imagine you've accumulated a pretty large body of these portraits of yourself. What have you realized about yourself through this photography of yourself?
To backtrack, I was speaking that almost every photograph I make is a self-portrait, not a literal portrait of myself, but more of a deeper understanding for me of what it is. Like when I'm photographing another person, it feels like I'm photographing, like how would I want to be seen? Looking like you look and knowing what I know and knowing your story. I try to get to know everybody, and somehow it becomes like a portrait of myself.
Oh, I see what you mean. So not literal self-portraits,
right.
But there are a lot of self-portraits in your body of work, and you said it's like therapy. So I was curious about that vein of your work and what you're studying about yourself through the accumulation of these self photos.
Oh my gosh. Comedy, I think, is deep in it. I have fun with the camera and myself, but it's more just watching myself grow as an artist and grow as a human. I've been through, I'll just say, the ringer in my life. Like I've had some horrific accidents and it's been a long list of experiences.
These horrific accidents, did they happen when you were much younger, or have they happened periodically throughout your life?
Periodically throughout my life.
Have they been like freak things, or things that, wow, I was stupid to get myself into this situation?
Oh gosh, but a little bit of both. Yeah. I tend to be fearless of most things, except anxiety, which I'm terrified from, which is just ironic as
that is. I don't know how being fearless and having high anxiety coexist.
Yeah, but fearless in a sense of I will go anywhere to photograph in anywhere, the barrios of Mexico, and photograph prostitutes to get awareness around this is going on in the world. And being escorted out with AK-47s, and it's been a wild ride. I'm not scared to go in and do the work.
I'm surprised, given that fearlessness, that you didn't devote yourself more to photojournalism and going out into war zones or very dangerous parts of this world and shoot photography for Time Magazine or the New York Times or the New Yorker. I'm just curious, why did that never really cross your mind?
It just didn't. It seemed like I would have to be working, I would have to be producing for someone. And for the longest time, I didn't think I could do that outside of, I don't even know what. I want to do my thing. And every time I would work with an art director, they would push their thing, which I would make for them. And then can I have 15 minutes just to do what I want to do? And I did this for my weddings too. That's how it all got started. And I would just do 15 minutes, and guess which ones they would always pick? They'd always pick mine.
You said you didn't go to these places unless you were hired to do so. Tell me about the kinds of jobs that would bring you into these very dangerous places. What kind of work was that?
I did a DP job in conjunction with Tribeca Films, and we spent 3 weeks, maybe a month in South Memphis, which at that time was the highest crime rate in the United States, and got to see from the inside of, like, we couldn't even get a police escort in some of the places. They wouldn't even give us one.
What were you shooting in South Memphis?
It was film. So we did a...
What was the project?
It was, and it's still not out yet, so I can't say a whole
Can you say
lot.
what it's about?
Yeah. It's about this rise to stardom from the streets in modern dance. There's a dancer named Lil Buck, Lil Buck. And the guy is like Mikhail Baryshnikov passed him the torch of the king of modern dance. Like the guy can levitate. It's the most amazing things he can do. So I got brought on this project for a director of photography or creative. They didn't even know. They came to town. They're like, we just want your eye. We see what you can do. At that time, I wasn't doing anything with video. I was doing stop motion, weird shit for me. We went to Iceland first. And so Iceland...
You went from Iceland to South Memphis.
Yeah, so we spent 3 weeks in Iceland, 3 weeks in South Memphis, and then I went to Washington, D.C. for a while too. But the dancer Lil Buck would go into the sewers to dance to stay out of the gangs and not get killed. Like all his friends were killed. To this day, it's still really rough.
Wow.
It's terrifying. But it's like, what did you envision down there? When you were down there dancing in this sewer, like where were you in your mind? It was just beautiful, just ice and just snow and just nothingness. And so we're like, we got to go to Iceland.
Gosh.
So literally on a whim, a week, I think, advance notice, we all flew to Iceland and started making a movie.
What's the most dangerous situation you've been in as a photographer?
Oh my gosh. I'd love to make a joke here and say it's the mother of the bride in New York when she thought I didn't show up to the ceremony because I'm very much a fly on the wall. And she was livid, like screaming at me after the ceremony.
Okay, not counting wedding photography.
Right.
Where have you been in the world that, despite your fearlessness, you're in this situation that, in retrospect, you look back like, holy shit, this was a really weird, dangerous place?
Probably Mexico. That time in Mexico, like it was pretty sketchy. Like they had vans blocking the alley so we couldn't get out. And yeah,
what happened?
Nothing really. I didn't spend any jail time in Mexico, but I didn't speak Spanish. So it was a lot of back and forth and gun pointing and finger pointing and wanting to take my camera. And it was...
Were you by yourself?
We were a group of 4 that decided to split up.
How long ago was this?
Oh gosh, that was early 2000s.
Okay,
Yeah.
gosh. Tell me about the body of work you're planning for Mars Landing Galleries. I find it really interesting that you've lived a really varied life through the lens of your camera and probably outside that lens of your camera, through the viewfinder of your camera and outside the viewfinder of your camera. And this is going to be your first real big solo exhibition.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's taken this long for you, and given this body of work that you've amassed, to have your first solo exhibition? Was it just something you just never really sought out?
No, I didn't really seek it out, and I felt like it wasn't my time yet. And I've had some big opportunities. My stuff has been in the United Nations. It's been in the Mayor's Summit in Mexico City, the Royal Palace in Thailand, climate awareness, and all this is revolving around climate awareness. And so it's been around the world hanging 100 photographs that changed the world. And then after that, it became 50 photographs. And I had 2 of my photographs in there hanging between Sebastião Salgado and Steve McCurry.
That's amazing.
That's my pinnacle, right? So I don't need a solo show. I got to hang next to Sebastião Salgado.
Right.
So.
But you have one coming up at Mars Landing in Mars Hill. Tell me about the work you're going to bring. Is any of it new and never been seen, or some of it very old?
More than half of it is, I think there's going to be about 30 pieces. More than half of it has never been seen by anybody, like my lady friend, and that's it. And it's really exciting. I've been pushing really hard for this. It's a body of work that, wow, I get to tell a story. I get to ask questions with.
You said you get to tell a story. What is the connecting thread, if there is one, through most, if not all of this work?
So the thread connected through is that they're all reflected back at me again. Like they're all my struggles and my self-portraits, although I use other people to depict what I have gone through. They're not single photographs either. Each photograph is actually a merging of 2 or more photographs.
That's what I was alluding to earlier about your merging of photographs and what you're trying to achieve after the shoot to create an image.
So these days, a merging of a photograph seems computer animated, right? You do it in the computer. And I went back to my old way of doing things, to making a physical tactile print. And then what can I do with this print now that it's done? I've done all the toning, I've done all the sloppy borders and all the things you can do to a print. It's, well, why can't I have prints talk to one another? How do I do that? I put them next to each other, and one's toned this way and one's toned this. And what does that say? And it's not working. So then it ended up being a scrap pile of stuff ripped up, and I started playing around with laying prints on top of one another, and some of the information has gone off of one print and added information from another print is put behind it, and all of a sudden these new narratives and new dialogues that were really stronger than the single photograph that was ever meant to be made. And it really gets deep. It gets deep into religion. It gets deep into politics. Definitely the human condition, the human mental condition, for sure.
You said a lot of this for you is about process. And I'm wondering, do you think it comes across tangibly to the eye afterward, that the difference between making an image in your studio after the fact using real darkroom techniques versus doing it all digitally? Is there a difference that ends up tangibly in the print itself?
To some, yes. To some, no. Like, to me, there is a difference. These are all digitally printed, but they're printed on a technology. It's basically the same printer the Smithsonian uses to do all their stuff. It's a 12 pigment printer. So it's 12 color pigment printer. Now,
this being your first solo exhibition, do you now have a desire to be collected, is this something that now to lean more into the fine art world versus wedding photography, is that something that's motivating you?
Yeah, I have several collectors that have collected my stuff over the years, many actually, but to have it in public, this is all people that know me, people that know the stuff. They have this vision of me. Yeah, someday this is going to be worth a lot more than I paid for it. So that's great. And to have it here in my home, which is lovely. It's the first podcast I've been on in Asheville in 20 years. So thank you.
I don't know that podcasting has been around for 20 years.
Yeah, I know, right?
I want to thank photographer Parker Pfister for today's great conversation. Our conversation took place at the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which comes to me courtesy of Asheville Contemporary Dance Theater and owners Susan and Giles Collard. If you value the Overlook's place in Asheville's media landscape, please consider joining dozens of others who are supporting the show through my Patreon crowdfunding page. Become a member for as little as $5 a month. Visit patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. Our First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. The theme song for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes to us courtesy of the Asheville duo The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on any social media channel at AVL Overlook. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook with Matt Peiken. Hey everyone, Matt Peiken here with the Overlook Podcast. Did you know this is my full-time job? That's right, I left Asheville's public radio station to start this show from scratch. Now I'm coming to you to help keep it going. This is my first fundraising campaign, and my goal? reaching just $1,000 in monthly contributions. That's right, just $1,000 in monthly contributors by Election Day. That means you, listening right now, can make a big difference with your support. Membership starts at just $5 a month. Think about the difference the Overlook makes in your knowledge and engagement with the heartbeat of Asheville. Then take a moment and go to my Patreon crowdfunding page at patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. Help my show climb to $1,000 in monthly contributions today, and thank you so much for your support.